The jungle was a cathedral of green and silence, its air thick enough to drink. Sergeant Mason Red lay prone on a damp slope, the cold barrel of his rifle pressed into the mud. Through his scope, he could see the ridge, a gleaming scar of alien alloy and arrogance. The Tlar officers stood there, as they always did, radiant beneath the gray morning light, their crystalline armor refracting every glimmer into cruel rainbows. From that height, they watched the enslaved humans in the valley below and laughed. Mason couldn't hear the laughter from this distance, but he didn't need to. He could see it in the tilt of their heads, the lazy gestures, the mockery woven into every elegant movement. He exhaled slowly, adjusting the focus. His trigger finger brushed the safety, but he didn't fire. His rounds couldn't pierce that armor. He'd already learned that the hard way. The memory still stung. The first time he'd lined up one of those shining monsters in his scope, fired, and watched the bullet bounce off harmlessly. The officer had turned, looked straight toward his position, and saluted with a mocking grace before walking away. Mason could still feel the heat of that humiliation like a wound that never closed. A soft rustle came from behind him. Corporal Linh crept forward, face camouflaged in streaks of mud and sweat. "Same 6 officers," she whispered. "No new patrols. They're getting comfortable." "Comfortable," Mason murmured. "Good. Makes them slow." "They're also laughing at us again," Linh added. Her tone carried no anger, only quiet observation. She was younger than Mason by almost a decade, but her eyes had seen enough to age her twice over. It's a pattern now. Every morning, same time. They line up, look down at the workers, and laugh. Mason adjusted the lens. It's not laughter. It's dominance. Feels the same on this end. He glanced at her briefly. Linh was wiry, composed, and meticulous in her habits. Every movement deliberate, every word filtered through thought. He admired that about her, even if he'd never say it aloud. The two of them had been paired for 5 months, one of the last active sniper teams on Hedra IV, a planet that once glittered with human colonies before it was swallowed by Tlar occupation. What was left now were pockets of resistance, ghosts hiding in the wilderness, clinging to the old fight with broken weapons and dwindling faith. Mason watched as a worker stumbled under a heavy crate. One of the officers stepped forward and struck the man across the back with a glowing baton. The worker fell, motionless. The officer tilted its head again, the motion oddly elegant, and laughed. Lin's jaw tightened. "They don't even see us as people." "They don't have to," Mason said. "They think we're finished." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Are we?" For a moment, Mason didn't answer. The air between them vibrated with the low hum of alien machinery drifting from the ridge. He thought about the months spent in the jungle, watching his unit shrink from 30 soldiers to 2. He thought about command silence, the supply drops that never came. And yet, something inside him still burned, small, stubborn, and impossibly human. "Not until they stop laughing," he said finally. The ridge shimmered in the heat, distant and unreachable. A drone buzzed overhead, scanning the treetops with a cone of blue light. Mason and Linh froze, hardly breathing. The light passed over their position, then moved on, unaware. When the sound faded, Linh spoke again. "We can't stay here forever. We're low on rations, and our transmitter's range is shot. If Command hasn't sent anything by now, they will." Mason interrupted. His tone was calm, but certain in a way that surprised even him. "They have to." Linh sighed quietly, adjusting her rifle. "You still trust Command?" "I trust that someone up there remembers how to fight." The words hung in the humid air, half belief, half prayer. Mason returned his eye to the scope, just as one of the officers raised a long, elegant arm, pointing toward the valley. 2 drones descended, their engines shrieking. Workers scattered in panic. Mason's gut twisted, but he kept watching. He needed to remember this. The arrogance, the cruelty, the way they looked when they thought themselves untouchable. He needed the anger sharp and ready. The calm bead in his ear crackled. Linh turned her head toward the faint sound. "Signal coming through," she whispered, adjusting the receiver. Static gave way to a clipped human voice. "Unit Bravo 7, This is Command Relay 2-4. Confirm location. Linh blinked, startled. We're here, she said quickly. Coordinates transmitting. Requesting status update. Supply drop inbound, the voice replied. Package designation, Artemis Variant. Estimated arrival, 6 hours. Maintain position until retrieval. Then the signal cut out. Only the whisper of rain remained. Linh turned toward Mason, eyebrows raised. Artemis Variant? Never heard of it. Mason allowed himself a small smile. Neither have I. But if they're sending something with a name, it means it's important. Could be another sensor array, or something that changes the balance, he finished. We'll find out soon enough. They fell silent. The jungle moved around them, restless but watchful. Mason's gaze returned to the ridge. The officers were still there, gleaming like living statues. One of them held up a severed human tool, a shovel snapped in two, and twirled it mockingly before tossing it aside. The others laughed again. A chorus of crystalline arrogance carried faintly through the wind. Linh whispered, I want to see their faces when they stop laughing. You will, Mason said. We both will. They remained there until the sun dipped low, its dying light turning the alien metal into liquid fire. When darkness came, they packed silently, every movement practiced. Mason paused one last time, looking toward the ridge. He could see the faint glow of alien lanterns, each one a reminder of how far humanity had fallen, and how close they stood to rising again. He touched the mud-slick barrel of his rifle, feeling its weight, its patience. Tomorrow, he said softly, we stop watching. Linh met his eyes, understanding without needing words. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. The jungle shivered, and the ridge gleamed like a promise waiting to be broken. Rain whispered across the canopy as dawn crept over Hedra IV. The jungle seemed to hold its breath again, though now it trembled with anticipation rather than fear. Mason crouched beside the open crate, steam curling from the damp soil. Inside, nestled in foam, lay a weapon that didn't belong to this century, long, brutal, and unapologetically human. Its matte black frame glistened under the faint gray light, the engraved text along its barrel stark and deliberate. Artemis Variant .50 BMG. Linh ran her fingers along the rifle's length, reverent and cautious. Old world design. No plasma, no coils, just metal and momentum. Mason lifted the weapon carefully, feeling the dense weight settle against his shoulder. It was heavier than his railgun, far simpler in concept, yet infinitely more personal. He'd read about the .50 BMG round in the archives, how it could pierce armored vehicles, drop aircraft, and make steel scream. Seeing one now, re-engineered for alien armor, felt like shaking hands with history. Command really sent this? He murmured. Looks like they finally remembered physics still works, Linh replied. She opened a secondary compartment, revealing the ammunition. Thick, hand-polished rounds tipped with dull silver. Armor-piercing tungsten cores. If these don't break glass, nothing will. Mason inserted a magazine, the click echoing like a promise. He slung the rifle across his back and stared through the fog toward the ridge. We move before sunrise. Those officers won't expect us to come back this soon. The trek through the jungle was a crawl through living darkness. Their camouflage cloaks, soaked and mottled with moss, blended into the wet greens. Linh moved with the precision of a shadow. Mason followed the faint rhythm of her breathing through the calm. The ridge grew closer with each step, its shape sharpening through the fog. A wound in the earth filled with alien arrogance. They reached their previous position before dawn, settling into the shallow depression where vines hid the muzzle flash. Linh unpacked the scope data, feeding real-time telemetry to Mason's visor. Wind at 4 meters per second east, humidity holding. At just 2 clicks right. He nodded, focusing through the scope. The world narrowed to the reticle and the ridge. There they were again, the Tlar officers, haloed by the rising light. Their armor shimmered, translucent and immaculate. One officer leaned lazily against a metallic pillar, speaking to the others in that sharp, clicking tongue that made Mason's teeth ache. They were mocking something, probably the failed human shot weeks ago. The one Mason had taken. He exhaled slowly. Let's remind them. The rifle settled perfectly against his shoulder. Every muscle, every heartbeat, synchronized into a single line of intent. He aimed at the lead officer's chest plate first, just below the glowing emblem that pulsed like a heartbeat. The scope wavered once as wind shifted, then stilled. Mason's finger tightened. The shot cracked the jungle open. It wasn't the hiss of plasma or the electric snap of a railgun. It was thunder. Pure, ancient, bone-rattling thunder. The recoil slammed into his shoulder, but the sound was worth it. Through the scope, he saw the officer's armor implode in a spray of refracted light, the crystalline plate shattering like brittle ice. The alien collapsed backward, fragments scattering across the ridge. For a heartbeat, the others froze. Then confusion rippled through their ranks. Mason chambered another round and fired again. The second officer's helmet burst apart in a flash of blue mist. Shards fell like rain. "Two confirmed," Linh whispered. "They don't even know where it's coming from." Mason adjusted aim, tracking a third target as the aliens scrambled for cover. Their energy shields flared bright, humming with defiance, but when the next round struck, it tore straight through, shredding both barrier and body. The ridge erupted in panic. Drones zipped into the air, scanning wildly for a heat signature. But Mason and Linh were ghosts, buried beneath the damp canopy. "They're broadcasting distress," Linh said. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before reinforcements." "Then let's make them count." Mason switched to single fire, his breathing calm and deliberate. Each shot was a sentence, each echo a declaration. One officer after another fell, their once pristine armor now glittering debris across the ridge. Through the scope, Mason caught sight of a human worker, a gaunt man staring up from the valley floor. The man's eyes widened as he saw the officers fall. Then he raised his fist. Linh saw it too. They're realizing it. The officers are dying, and the humans below, slaves for months, began to stir. Tools clanged against the ground. A low murmur rose, swelling into a roar. The balance Mason had waited for all this time began to tip. He reloaded, his fingers steady despite the adrenaline flooding his veins. "We're done being background noise," he muttered. "Contact on the ridge's east side," Linh warned. Two officers regrouping near the power core. Mason pivoted slightly, sighting them through the foliage. They moved cautiously now, scanning the tree line. One gestured toward the valley, signaling for drone fire. Mason waited, patient as the jungle itself. When the officer's head turned, he pulled the trigger. The round hit the helmet dead center, and the explosion of crystalline fragments caught the second officer full in the face. Both went down in silence. "That's all of them," Linh breathed. "Not yet," Mason said. He scanned the ridge one final time. Only shattered armor and flickering energy fields remained. The laughter that once carried down the valley had vanished. The jungle was silent, reverent almost. Even the insects paused. Below, the enslaved workers began to climb the ridge, tentatively at first, then faster, emboldened. The sight filled Mason with something he hadn't felt in years: vindication. Humanity wasn't broken. It had only been waiting for a reason to rise. Linh touched his arm. "We should move. Reinforcements will come hard and fast." "Let them," Mason replied. He ejected the spent magazine, letting it fall into the mud. "They'll find nothing left to lead them." He took one last look through the scope. The ridge that once glittered with alien arrogance now shimmered with ruin. Glass shards caught the light like 1,000 tiny suns, each reflecting something human, a spark, a defiance that refused to die. Mason exhaled and lowered the rifle. "They mocked us from that ridge," he said softly. "Now they can choke on the silence." The jungle wind answered with a low sigh, carrying the scent of smoke and shattered crystal. Linh packed the remaining gear, and together they melted back into the foliage, their footprints swallowed by mud. Behind them, the ridge burned quietly, a scar of victory in a world that had forgotten hope. Far above, faint streaks of light marked the beginning of the alien response. Mason didn't look up. The fight was far from over, But for the first time, humanity had drawn blood that wouldn't be ignored. Smoke curled upward from the ridge like a signal to forgotten gods. The once gleaming alien stronghold had become a ruin of fractured crystal and molten alloy. Mason crouched at the edge of the destruction, rifle balanced across his knees, eyes scanning for any movement through the drifting haze. The jungle beyond was alive with distant echoes, bursts of human shouts, metallic clatters, the crackle of energy weapons fading into the valley. Humanity was moving again, and the Tlar were no longer untouchable. Linh climbed up from the lower slope, her boots slipping on loose shards. Each step crunched underfoot like breaking glass. She stopped beside Mason, panting, her face streaked with grime and sweat. "The workers took the lower camp," she said. "They're arming themselves with scavenged rifles. We started something bigger than we planned." Mason didn't look at her right away. His gaze lingered on the alien officer's corpse lying nearby, its body half submerged in the mud. The helmet, or what was left of it, was a jagged ruin. Through the fractured plates, faint inner light pulsed once, then died completely. "No," he said quietly. "We didn't start it. We just reminded them it wasn't over." The rain began again, gentle at first, then steadier. It washed blood and dust down the ridge, carrying shards of alien armor into the valley below. Mason watched as one fragment caught on a root and glimmered faintly. He reached down, turning it in his hand. The surface was cool, smooth as ice, but inside, fine cracks spidered in every direction, tiny veins of defeat. Linh crouched beside him, examining the fragment. "Looks fragile now. Everything does once it breaks," Mason replied. He slipped the piece into his pouch. "Proof that they can bleed." A faint hum rippled through the air. Linh tensed instantly, lifting her rifle. Above the ridge, a low-flying Tlar skimmer emerged from the mist, scanning lights sweeping the ground. Its sleek design reflected the chaos below, a predator searching for order in the ruins. Mason ducked beneath a fallen beam, pulling Linh down beside him. The skimmer passed overhead, slow and deliberate. The hum deepened, mechanical and ominous. Then, after a moment that stretched like wire, it turned away, banking toward the horizon where black smoke marked the human counteroffensive. Mason exhaled. "They're retreating. They're regrouping," Linh corrected, though her voice lacked conviction. He looked at her, saw the exhaustion behind her steady eyes, and felt the same weight pressing on his chest. They were soldiers, not saviors, but this small victory had changed something deeper than strategy. It had reshaped belief. For months, humanity had lived as prey, scavenging under the shadow of crystalline giants. Now, even if the fight continued, they had proven the giants could fall. "Command's going to want proof," Linh said, activating her recorder and panning it across the shattered ridge. "They'll need to see what this rifle can do." Mason nodded and adjusted the Artemis Variant, its black frame still warm from use. The rifle looked ordinary again, its power hidden behind simplicity. "Command will want to mass-produce it," he said. "They'll see a weapon. But that's not what broke them." "What did, then?" He glanced toward the valley where humans were gathering around captured drones, their voices rising in unison. "Belief," he said. For the first time in months, they saw an alien die. Thunder rolled through the mountains, a long, echoing sound that blurred the line between weather and war. Linh holstered her sidearm and slung her pack. "Extraction's 2 clicks east. We'll have to move through the old tunnel route." Mason stood, stretching his shoulders, the rifle slung across his back once more. The rain thickened, muting the world into shades of gray and green. As they descended the ridge, human figures emerged from the mist. Workers turned fighters, faces streaked with mud and disbelief. Some nodded as Mason passed. Others simply stared, as if seeing him for the first time. A man stepped forward, clutching a makeshift spear. "You're the one who did this?" His voice trembled not with fear, but awe. Mason didn't answer. He didn't need to. Linh offered the man a curt nod, and they moved on. The jungle seemed to part for them, as though the planet itself recognized something had shifted. By the time they reached the tunnel entrance, a hollowed fracture in the hillside. The rain had softened to a whisper. Linh stopped before entering, wiping mud from her visor. "Do you think they'll come back stronger?" she asked. "They always do," Mason said. "But so do we." They entered the tunnel, flashlights cutting thin beams through the darkness. The air was cool and dry, a reprieve from the suffocating jungle. Their footsteps echoed softly, and for a few moments, silence wrapped around them like a fragile peace. "Back there," Linh said quietly, "when you took that first shot, did you hesitate?" Mason didn't answer right away. He thought of the alien's faceplate, of the reflection that had looked so much like sunlight. "No," he said finally. "Not this time. I think I hesitated the day I let them laugh." They walked on. The tunnel curved downward, opening into a cavern lit by dim, bioluminescent moss. It cast their shadows long and uneven across the walls. Mason stopped, turning the shard of alien armor over in his hand again. In the faint glow, the fractures caught the light like veins of fire. He set it gently on a rock. "Leave it," he said. "Let the jungle remember." Linh watched him for a moment, then nodded. "You think this changes the war?" Mason's expression was unreadable. "It changes us. That's enough." Outside, the first orange flickers of dawn began to bleed through the clouds, cutting lines of color across the ruined ridge. The jungle breathed alive and waiting. Somewhere above, alien ships were retreating into the atmosphere, their once dominant hum replaced by the echo of thunder and the distant cries of free humans. Mason paused at the tunnel's exit, looking back once more. The ridge, broken and silent, gleamed faintly in the weak morning light, its glass now dull, its pride shattered. He touched the rifle's barrel, feeling the cold metal steady beneath his hand. "They thought they'd silenced us," he said quietly, "but they only taught us how loud we could be." Linh gave a faint, tired smile. "Let's go remind the rest." They stepped into the light, their silhouettes fading into the mist. Behind them, the ridge stood as both grave and monument, proof that arrogance could break, and that defiance, once awakened, would never sleep again.